This is episode 272 of the Books, Shows, Tunes, and Mad Acts podcast. This episode is titled The Use of AI in Screenwriting. And don't forget that we have 271 past episodes for you to listen to for free. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Books, Shows, Tunes, and Mad Acts. I'm your host, Jennifer Crittenden. Books, Shows, Tunes, and Mad Acts is brought to you by Discreet Guide, the training company for improving your speaking and writing skills. Thank you for joining us, and tune in on Mondays for new episodes. I'm really delighted to welcome a new guest to the show today. I have Craig Erpelding with me from Indiana University. So welcome to the show, Craig.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm really delighted to have you with us today. We're going to be talking about AI and filmmaking and really some exciting topics, very contemporary. So yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Yeah, absolutely. I am very much looking forward to talking about this hot topic right now and sharing some insight for your listeners to kind of think through.
Yeah, good. Well, I'll introduce you. So Craig won the 2023 UFVA Teaching Award, which I was very interested to learn about. I think teaching is such an interesting area, sort of an area that I certainly never stopped learning in. And this teaching award is given out by the University Film and Video Association. So quite an honor for you to win that. Craig is also an award-winning independent filmmaker himself, with projects screened at venues and festivals across 4 continents, global. His textbook, Filmmaking with Intention, A Comprehensive Guide to Creating Engaging Motion Pictures, is in first edition from Cognella Publishing. He earned his MFA in directing from DePaul University's Digital Cinema program in 2015, and also took some classes and did some work at UCLA. He also has a BA in journalism and mass communications from Kansas State University. And a little bit more information here that I wanted to provide. He's written and directed various short films and an independent television pilot, but he's also worked for several network TV shows like Fox's Empire, ABC's Mind Games, and NBC's Crisis. He's also served on various committees in the industry and served as a jury member for some film festivals. He was a journalist and editor for various filmmaking trade magazines. And especially this part, listen up, y'all. His academic and creative work focuses on narrative cinema and episodic and serialized TV development and developing, producing and directing motion pictures via intention for audience engagement with a focus on visual language, camera work, and post-production techniques. And I hope we're going to be able to get into some of that today in talking about AI, but kind of getting into the weeds about what this means to make movies and how AI can help us or hurt us with that. All right, so here we go. I wanted to start with a question that seems to freak people out the most about AI. And I read, I hope this is accurate, but I read someone say that you have held the position that at this point, AI engines don't have the ability to replace human creatives in screenwriting. Is this an accurate description of how you feel? Do you still feel that way, and why or why not?
Well, first of all, I just want to thank you for that amazing introduction. You make me seem like an incredibly busy human being. I don't know if I'm quite that busy, but I have had the pleasure and honor to be able to do so many different things across the country, around the world, and just am blessed to be able to have this time with you today to talk through the future of filmmaking and the future of content creation, because I think the important thing is that it is here. It is here. We're seeing content created by AI, and maybe we don't even know or realize it. And the first thing that I do want to say is that, before I answer the question, is I am not an advocate of AI as a replacement to workers. I am not an advocate of AI as a replacement by studios for screenwriters or coming up with screenplay content, nor am I an advocate of content created by AI to replace content that would be created by and initiated by human being and human creativity. I'm not an advocate for the irresponsible publishing of content created by AI. And I am also very much not an advocate of AI taking over the world from us. But I do want to kind of give you a little bit of a clue as to why I started looking at AI, and which led me to the statement that you had alluded to earlier about what the capabilities of AI are now within screenwriting. Because I think that a lot of people hear these horror stories about AI in the news, the strikes obviously in Hollywood regarding AI. But that's way above me at this point. I have been working, AI is so new in this space, only within the last few years, even though it's been in development for a long time at major corporations. The ability for AI to kind of work in a way to, within this realm, to replicate a human being in the way that a story is created was something me as a teacher of screenwriting, a teacher of these sort of things, I thought I better get in front of this before students just simply start using AI to write their screenplays for classes and things like that, which led me to two sort of interesting, avenues of inquiry. One is, how can I try and educate myself on AI to spot when students are using AI to deliver content for their assignments to me? And then the second one was, look, as much as we don't want AI to replace human beings, as much as we definitely do not want people to lose jobs or lose careers based on the advancement of technology like this, the fact of the matter is, and we all have to understand this, technology pushes forward industries all the time. Yep. We think all the way back to what Henry Ford did with the assembly line. We think of, things that I hated when I first saw self-checkouts at a grocery store, because I knew that was taking jobs away from somebody. And now there's more self-checkout lines than human aided checkouts. And so some of this is just, look, we have to understand how to live, in concert with the advancement of technology. And just to give one other quick little background, filmmaking has dealt with these advancements in technology for a long, long time, from, early days where everything happened on celluloid film. All of the editing happened on, stand-up moviolas, which was an advancement from the time when people simply would look at strings of clips of film and cut it with scissors and splice it together and do it all physically and manually themselves. And so as we've gone through things, I was lucky to be a journalist at the time when we saw the advancement of things like Premiere Pro come into play, which kind of messed up Avid for all of the people that worked in film editing. We saw HD technology come in and really mess up the opportunity for filmmakers to feel like they could only shoot beautiful things on celluloid film because the video technology wasn't there. I wrote an article about Canon, who made the mistake of providing DSLRs, which are photography cameras, to journalists that had the ability to shoot video clips. And that changed the cinematic landscape for all young filmmakers with maybe not a lot of money. They could all of a sudden shoot things at 24 frames per second that felt cinematic and use lenses. So the advancement of technology within the space which we're talking about is something that continually happens over time. This one is very much more a crisis moment, I think, for the industry, because you're not looking at an advancement of technology in that it changes the user experience or a filmmaker's experience. We're looking at technology that is aimed to replace, right? And I think that was one of the first things that I did is I said, let me use ChatGPT to write a feature film, providing it absolutely no context and just say, write a feature film. And what I found right away is that ChatGPT cannot do that. It does not have the ability to take a prompt, write a feature film. As a matter of fact, there was one element of this that I really researched was, can it replicate the tone and style of certain writers? And so I would say, do you understand this screenwriter? Can you write a screenplay in that style or tone? And it said no. Or could you write a screenplay that presents a certain idea that might be negative to cultural or racial connotations? And it said no, I cannot do that. Trying to figure out how evil this thing can be, how far we can push the boundaries with our commands. What I found is that it only has it has a great ability of figuring out things that are available to it in its database of knowledge. Okay, so all of this AI works off of a background database of knowledge, predetermined data sets. A lot of that is gleaned from the internet, which I'll come back to in a second. A lot of it is through communications on the internet, and a lot of it now is through the things that we type into these interfaces, gets recorded. So it has a memory that it grows as humans use these more, the memory of the data set grows. What I found is that there was a limit to how much it could actually write at any one point in time in the prompt. So I started with write a screenplay. It could not do that. That was, it would write a screenplay that was about, 500 words long. And I said, write a feature length screenplay, and it would write it, and it wouldn't be much longer than that. Obviously, a feature length screenplay has to be about 70, 80, 90 pages. It does not have the ability to write 80 or 90 pages. So right away, I said, okay, great. It is not going to write a screenplay right away. It just does not have the capability to think in that long, 90 pages worth of content. So then I said, well, how would I, if I'm being the evil sort of like content creator now, how would I do this? One thing that it does know from its established database is a lot of academic sort of techniques and theories on how to craft stories based on outlining and plot points. Things like Sid Field's 3-act structure, things like the hero's journey, Save the Cat's beat outline sheet. It understands all of these things. And I could ask it to make an outline of a film based on, say, Sid Field's 3-act structure and all of the plot points. And it would come out with an outline. And then what I understood would be, I can actually ask AI then to, instead of writing an entire screenplay, write each scene, which are smaller chunks, write each scene based on the outline that it had created. So again, I provided no input. I just said, based on Sid Field's 3-act structure, write a beat outline for a feature film. And that was it. I didn't say anything more than that. And then I let it do that. I then asked it to make, now write the scene, and I would cut and paste from its own outline. Now, the important thing here to understand about AI is, again, there is a memory that it retains in order to, again, expand its sort of like database. But within each conversation, it retains information based on the things that you've asked it before. So it remembered what the whole story was. It understood everything from the chat prior to that point. So that's one thing, and we can get to the benefit of that from a creative standpoint, that it remembers and it has a memory through the conversation, which can be a good thing. But in this case, I asked it to write all of the scenes, and then I simply cut and paste those scenes into a screenplay format software once I was done, and I exported it out. By the time it got done with the screenplay that it had outlined, again, me going scene by scene, it was only 38 pages long, or roughly between 35 and 40 pages, which means that it didn't even have the ability to get to the amount of pages that would be necessary.
Right.
And because of that, there was huge gaps between a lot of the scenes. There was a lot of, it would kind of tail off in a certain direction. There would be a lot of what we call quote unquote loose ends. We would go down one direction and the software would never come back to it, or AI would never come back to it to close those loopholes by just allowing it to kind of like write based on it off of its own sort of, it just did a very bad job. It does not know how to format a screenplay. It does not know how to write with any specific voice. It's all based off of cliche, and it's all based off of its memory. And its memory, ChatGPT 3.5, its memory went up to, if you can imagine, late 2021. Well, if you think about the things that people were talking about online to support this database in the 2019s, 2020s, and 2021s in the United States. So the movie that it came up with was an underground conspiracy theory type movie where the government was doing this, and it didn't even do it as compelling as what real life was. And so at that point in time, I just realized that, hey, does ChatGPT, again, this is ChatGPT 3.5, which is a free interface for everybody. Anybody can use that free, and then you can pay up to get a different version of it. But again, can ChatGPT 3.5 write a screenplay that is going to put Hollywood at risk? I will stand by that 100%. There is absolutely no way. Now, this is also, today is April 17th, 2024. April 18th, 2024 could have a completely different something happen. I mean, the industry is moving that fast, and all of the conversations that I've been having with people it's moving fast. We're trying to keep up.
Yeah.
The people who are in charge of these AI, interfaces are trying to keep up. And so I think there's going to be a lot of interesting conversations in, Congress and the governments, and, Elon Musk has his thing to say about it. But I do know for a fact that the studios are using this to try and come up with ideas, to try and work through some of the development processes. And so we can kind of talk through a little bit of that again as we go along. But do I believe that ChatGPT can write a screenplay? It can write a screenplay, but it's nothing that is going to put anyone's job at risk right now.
Yeah, that's been my experience so far also, that it can do a lot, but at this point, it's still fairly easy to recognize something that's been created by ChatGPT. Part of it's the cliches, and it just doesn't sound human. It's funny too, because I teach English as a second language as part of my day job. And so my students are really getting great benefit from ChatGPT. It's really a wonderful tool for them to check their grammar, to inquire, does this sound normal? Would you make changes to this? But in some ways, it's almost too perfect, because sometimes it removes the pieces of the writing that would be the most human and quite unique and unusual. All that stuff goes out. And so you're left sometimes with some pretty bland, generic text. And in a way, it makes me sad, because as a reader, I think we really relish the things that are unique, and that maybe it's not perfect English, but it conveys the person's character or personality, which is just what's so great as a reader. So yeah, at this point in time, it's certainly not threatening true creatives, right? People who are really professional at this type of work. But yeah, as you say, things can certainly change. The issue about memory also is really interesting, because I've had some experiences where I think when it was first launched, there was more memory that was dedicated to each of the queries. But now maybe it depends on how many people are using it at a time, but they do seem to be restricting the memory. And so you get in these weird circles where it's like that word, you end up arguing with ChatGPT. You just gave me that word. Oh, no, I've never given you that word. Okay. So you're dealing with a thing that doesn't have enough memory to, so you get in, yeah, these very
Yeah,
funny.
and to put that into context of screenwriting, I've done an exercise where I used people in my real life. So I tried to make essentially a TV series based off of the all of my friends that I've known forever that are in my fantasy football league. Because
Okay.
I knew that I didn't have to spend any time doing character development because I know these people for years and years and years and years and years. So I wanted to make, a sitcom type thing where, I know the backstory of all these things and provide an environment for ChatGPT to then take these characters and have, these friends like conversations at the
Hmm.
coffee shop.
Hmm.
And one thing, and so I would do things where I would write, an initial blurb about one of my buddies. And then I would say, is there anything else that you want to know about this character? And I would let ChatGPT ask me questions and I would answer them. And then I would say, do you have four more questions about? And so, thinking about trying to test the memory of
Yeah.
ChatGPT and how deep it could go. And to your point, I spent hours
No.
providing backstory. And then by the time we got to the second scenario, it had already jumbled up,
Yeah.
the characters, catchphrases that are assigned to certain people or certain interests were all of a sudden swapped or misunderstood. And it fell back into, again, you had mentioned cliche. It fell back into cliche style tone and everything like that, and kind of lost even all of the time that I spent in all of these sort of like character sort of like
Mhm.
backgrounds were just, had just vanished. And that was obviously a little bit disappointing. But again, for the point of human beings being a part of the creative process, that let me know that writers' rooms in Hollywood are probably okay for a little bit of, again, because ChatGPT, again, that software or that interface, that AI doesn't necessarily provide that deep of a memory.
Yeah, and it's interesting too because as we notice these shortcomings compared to humans, well, I mean, for one thing, again, I'm always reminded of just how amazing the human brain is, right? We are just incredible creatures. Not to brag on us, but in comparison to AI at this point, it's just really remarkable what the human brain can do, especially a creative human brain. But in these identification of the shortcomings, you also get to see like possibly what the potential is. So, the memory thing, we're going to fix that, right? Or we'll pay more and we'll get more memory, right? So that will be okay. But this idea of really capturing one of your friends, right? What would your friend really say, even in a fictional context? I just think it's going to be maybe forever where you're going to know that because you just have this kind of feel for who that person is. Whereas AI, I just think that it would be very hard for it to have that kind of intuition and feel for what's credible and what's likely from one of your characters.
Yeah, and I think that just on that point real quick, I truly feel, I mean, everyone in the creative industry points back to, I think it was a Drake song that was an
Yes.
incredibly popular Drake song that was not a Drake song. It was just made by
Hmm.
AI. And that was kind of like the really scary moment here. But I think the really important part of this is that AI is trying to chase the level of creativity of humans. And I think that gap, like you had mentioned, is going to remain because I think, and as we talk through some of the things that I've been tinkering around with now, AI is always going to is always going to be chasing what humans and human brains are able to come up with creatively.
Hmm.
And I think that when that gets surpassed, then we're going to be in real trouble. But I think the one thing about human beings and on a positive note is that human beings adapt and can get smarter and more creative based off the types of things that are being created. And I think that as it creates these cliched sort of rough drafts, we could call it, of some type of content or some outline of some type of story, the humans are going to be the ones that take that and then actually make something creative and palatable from it. Because otherwise, we live in a society where we consume so much television content or filmic content or cinematic content that we don't necessarily want the same thing over and over and over and over again. And the consumers are going to be the ones that ultimately are going to say, look, studios, you put this thing out and, oh, well, that's impressive, but still, I would rather watch Will Ferrell actually act that than have an AI version, which seems to be kind of, similar, but not as punchy, because there is. So that's one thing that I have found very much so is that it can give me a decent draft of something, but in order to make it something that's palatable for consumption, I, as a human, have to go and take that essentially quote unquote rough draft and polish it. And for writers and screenwriters, especially, the first time that we put something down is a rough draft, and nobody ever sees that. And when I was at UCLA, it would take about 8 times of writing something and rewriting something and rewriting something until you really got a draft that you could call your first draft. So one thing that ChatGPT could help for creatives is bridge the gap. I mean, I looked at it to see is there a way to truncate the time? Because a lot of creatives sit there with a cursor on a blinking on a white, background as we're sitting there trying to say, what do we say? How do we introduce? Well, it will go ahead and do a lot of those sort of things. If I type in some basic parameters, it will shoot out again a rough draft based on my idea and the characters that I have come up with, and looking at it as an assistant to my own creativity, it will help provide a draft that I can jump right into the second draft of that sort of content and make the changes. A lot of times for writers, it's easier to make those changes and updates and rewrites than the initial draft itself. And so that to me was one really interesting thing that I found was, okay, all of a sudden, maybe I can teach my students to say, hey, come up with your great idea. Let ChatGPT write the first version of it, and have the students turn in that version as well as highlight all of their updates so that I can see as a teacher how they use ChatGPT and then how they made it their own. Because again, the one thing that we know is that students are going to use ChatGPT to try and write their assignments. And so again, like how can we incorporate this to try and find a responsible use within the creative community of AI? And that's just one element there to say, hey, our human creativity is going to be better than AI, but how can we use AI to further our own creativity? And that is one example.
Yeah, I love that. Well, first, I've got 100 things going on in my brain at once. First thing, I love this wonderful point you've made about that AI is chasing human achievement. I think that, wow, and that's right. And if it does that and it moves humans further forward, isn't that terrific, right? I mean, then it truly is a very beneficial tool for us, right? And people don't now have to be so freaked out about it as they kind of seem to be. But also, what I really like in your comments there is using ChatGPT or AI as a teaching tool. And I think that's right. Especially, I notice this in my writing classes that beginning writers, me included, we sometimes have trouble with the mechanics, like how do you get somebody out of a car and into a house, right? It's stuff like that as readers, we just go through, no problem at all. But when it comes to you actually making this happen, it's harder than it seems when you're a reader. But that's the kind of thing that Chat GPT can help us with, because obviously it has, thousands and thousands of examples of people getting out of a car and into a house. So just those kind of basic moving your characters around, or using some of these Save the Cat, Hero's Journey, all those kinds of things, helping us with that. So that seems quite interesting in teaching some of the fundamentals about just writing, the mechanics of writing.
And on that point, one interesting bit of research that I did is I took screenplays and dropped them into ChatGPT and essentially said, evaluate this screenplay. And it would provide information back to say, again, my research has it more specific, but along the lines of character A kind of comes out of nowhere. And I think the screenplay would benefit with a little bit of backstory as to how that person got to that place and then the interaction might happen. So it understands, those sort of fundamental sort of like story structure things.
Right.
And it can highlight those changes. So that's the other thing that we could do, in the class is say, hey, you've written that screenplay. Now drop it into ChatGPT, ask it for its evaluation of it, and then show me how you updated your screenplay based off of the suggestions that it made, and do that before turning it into me and having me. Most of us teachers that teach intro screenwriting are providing the exact same feedback to all of our students, which is your character's coming from nowhere, or you jumped from here to here. And ChatGPT can find those things and kind of exhibit it. And one of the really interesting things that I did is I would have it evaluate its own screenplays and then have it rewrite its own screenplay based off its own sort of comments, which it does do. And one final thing on the revision was I took Chinatown, which is, heralded as maybe the best screenplay of all time. And I dropped that into ChatGPT and said, evaluate this screenplay, because I wanted to make sure that ChatGPT could know the difference between a great screenplay and, a not so great screenplay. And right away it said, this is a piece of brilliant work and blah,
really?
blah, blah.
Oh,
so it did understand the differences there. But again, because ChatGPT itself doesn't write great screenplays, but it does, to your point, one thing about versioning and revisions is that if I have to figure out how character A is introduced to character B, or how to get character A motivated to do such and such thing to move along the plot, you can ask it for multiple ideas. So you can say, give me 3 ideas of how to get character A to go to the coffee shop. And if you don't like that, there's a thumbs up and a thumbs down in ChatGPT where you can say, I did not like that, give me more options. And so again, to me, as an assistant, ChatGPT helps as we're sitting there in a creative room, throwing ideas like spaghetti off a wall to see what is going to stick. ChatGPT in no time can come up with hundreds of options, variances, ideas. Now, again, they're all fairly cliche, but what we know from being in those sort of like brainstorm sessions is that the brainstorm doesn't come out with the concrete idea, but it provides the door that opens us to that solution. And again, I found that the idea that it came up with was not the one, but triggered my own human creativity to say, wait a second, that makes me think of this other scenario, which I then put into my story.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about your exercise of having it create a screenplay or a scene, or having the student do that, and then having the student critique what came out of ChatGPT. And I wonder if that would be a very interesting way to identify the shortcomings of a screenplay that's coming out of ChatGPT. I'm thinking of, with my teaching, I'll often have it make a poem that contains certain sounds that I want my client to practice. And so the poetry is horrible. It's really god awful coming out of ChatGPT, but it does give you a framework. So if you have any appreciation for poetry at all, you can improve upon it. And so you can take out some of the, really grotesque things that it's putting in there because it's poetry and find something that's better. And I wonder if that is an interesting teaching tool to help students identify things that are cliched or just not a very high quality.
Absolutely. And some of the people that I've sat on panels with, some colleagues from Chapman University, have used it to create log lines, and they have students use it to create log lines or synopsis of films. And they use that as an opportunity to say, this is average, and this would be a
Mm.
C. If you turn this in, this would be a C, and here's why. And use it as an opportunity to say, how can we do better than an
Yeah.
average grade? Because again, I think that, as far as ChatGPT and other AIs, they're looking to be serviceable currently, and passable. And I think that to me, that from an academic standpoint, really nailed it on the head, that ChatGPT is very good at doing C minus work.
Uh-huh.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But we can use that and say, well, you have to do better than this. And if we're
Mm-hmm.
using ChatGPT to say, go ahead and get me to the C minus, and now I'll take it to the A, I
Uh-huh.
think that as human creatives, that's a different way to kind of look at it.
Yeah, that seems really, yeah, like an excellent conclusion of this whole issue. I did want to dig into the story a little bit about having AI follow the Save the Cat, hero's journey, all that kind of stuff. And I'm a little bit confused about this, so maybe you can help me out. So just because I've been taking writing classes at UCLA and it's so script oriented, I keep falling into these seminars and so forth about screenwriting, even though that's not a serious pursuit of mine. But I keep falling into these workshops or seminars where they're teaching us, this surefire success method for your script. And they're very formulaic, right? This needs to happen in Act One. This needs to happen in Act Two. And so I'm confused about this, because if this is what Hollywood, from a commercial standpoint, is looking for, these kinds of formulaic scripts that result in formulaic movies that you and I see lots of times, we can see the ending coming a mile away, but there seems to be a lot of market for this, right? Or at least I'm assuming that, because Hollywood just keeps turning out these movies that kind of have the same story over and over. And so, like, how do we bridge the fact that there seems to be a market for that from a commercial standpoint, and yet that's not really what you and I would consider high quality work? And where does AI fit into that?
Well, you've loaded that question with a lot of variant topics, and so I'll try and hit them all at one time. When I was at UCLA, and you probably heard something very similar, my professor there said on the first day, you can write your screenplay however you want, but if you want to sell your screenplay, you're going to write it the way that I tell you.
Mm-hmm.
And that led us into the idea of these sort of Hollywood formulas. Now, when it comes to the Hollywood formulas, there's two specific reasons for them. And the idea of a screenwriter writing a movie, and a lot of what I tell my students is, a screenwriter isn't writing a movie. The audience for a screenwriter is not the people sitting in the AMC. The audience for the screenwriter is the assistants of the producers that are reading these screenplays and deciding and doing the coverage on them and deciding whether to send them up or down. And we all know very well that the assistants and the script readers are incredibly intelligent people and all go on to amazing careers, but a lot of them are not screenwriters. And so Save the Cat specifically was, for a long time there, that's what junior executives would read in Hollywood. And as long as they understood that, then they would be able to tell a good or bad screenplay by hitting those points. So that then translated to, well, if I'm a screenwriter and I want that executive to buy my screenplay, then I better write to the book that they're reading. So because of that, that's a very sort of industry, sort of like whirlpool, we can call it, because then the only content that comes out of those systems are the ones that are created within that system or that formula. And what that results in, and we've seen this change over time, we've seen this change across countries and cultures of the planet, is that we are conditioned as cinema going audiences to understand what we want in a movie. And that is largely based off of the things that we've seen before. And I talk about this a lot in my book, Filmmaking with Intention. And while I don't necessarily get into any one of those formulas specifically, I talk about if our intent is to make a film that connects with an audience, I have to know what type of content that audience connects with. And a lot of times we know that through genre, and we can say, look, if I go to a comedy film and I don't laugh, then that is not a successful, right? So we can go and we base off of human emotion, human reactions, and I call that audience expectations. Either the content that we create meets the audience expectations or it does not. And that ultimately determines whether or not a film or a TV show is successful or not successful. And in the book, I dig down into what I think provides that success. But to bring it back to the whirlpool, if we are being conditioned, or most of America and beyond is being conditioned to consume films that are created with a certain formula, because those formulas are the only types of films that the studio executives buy, and it's based off of a certain book, and that book is then one that is taught in screenwriting schools, then we can expect that the conditioning to persist.
Yeah.
That successful projects are going to look like the ones that have been successful before, using the same formulas for success as before. And I think that's really important that, again, ChatGPT is going to understand those formulas and help us work within the framework of those formulas. But the other side of this that I think is really interesting, because you also talked about a more artful sort of approach, or you talked about a more creative or a higher art or a higher creativity. Those types of screenplays, those types of stories that are a higher art or, a little more intellectual, those don't make as much money in the box office. And so again, what are the types of films that people who are using ChatGPT might be, or other AI? Well, it's clearly they're trying to find, again, the drafts, the early drafts, the development stages of creating their own IP based off of what AI can generate. AI generate 100 different ideas based off of this high concept. Titanic meets There Will Be Blood, and let's have it come up with 100 different ideas, and then go from there, and let's all copyright that. And so I think that is a reality. But I think, again, back to a screenwriter and dealing with those movements, the one thing that I found as a writer, and I've done this a little bit in ChatGPT as well, is that I understand cinematic arts and movements of a character through plots, through obstacles, through conflict. And I can, because I've done this so much, I can understand when it feels right to have a shift this way, or to introduce a character here. And that's based off of not necessarily these formulas, but having studied these formulas, but also having watched a bunch of content that has been successful or not successful. And I think that's a really interesting aspect of ChatGPT as well, is that while it doesn't do a good job in screenplays, it does write prose, novels very well. And I've been doing that too, where I will sit down and have a character and I'll say, write a chapter on this, and I'll see how it goes. And then, so I'm kind of steering it, as if it's a car and I'm behind the wheel and I'm saying, go down this road. And that's been very successful because organically, me as a writer and me as a creative can steer the ship and go down interesting little twists and turns, and go back and fill in some gaps and say, wait a second, if I'm introducing this character here, wouldn't it be interesting to go back and have some sort of set up to this payoff early on? And by having ChatGPT identify chapters, and I go back and say, now write a chapter 12.1, even though I'm on chapter 20, it will go and it'll understand that organization. And so, again, I think even for those creatives that aren't necessarily looking to live within the context of, I'm just trying to write a screenplay to sell it, but I'm doing it because I have a story that I want to tell. And I'm not a screenwriter, but I really would love to see what this feels like with characters and a plot. And I mean, it gives people the opportunity to explore based off of cinematic movements. Again, those visceral responses based off the audience expectations, that if we go to a movie and it's a horror film and I'm not scared, then
It
that's
didn't
not a
work.
success.
Mhm.
And that isn't necessary. You can follow hero's journey all you want, and maybe those scares won't happen. We see that happen with student screenwriters all the time. So it kind of, again, in my book and understanding that with ChatGPT, it gives you the opportunity to steer
Mhm.
and fabricate and create these sort of visceral moments, to the point where I even said to ChatGPT, write the scariest opening scene for, and I did my whole synopsis and character description, and it understands things like scary. It understands it, and I'll have a conversation between people, and it'll be very negative and stern, and I'll say, well, rewrite that and make it more whimsical, and it will. It understands emotions. It understands some of those sort of things, that tonality that
Mhm.
I think are really important for the creative process.
Mhm. You make such an interesting point there. And yeah, I'm rethinking this whole issue about, commercial kind of mundane, yeah, typical movie of the week kind of things versus a movie like Chinatown. And I think one of the things that we know about these formulas is that they work. Right. Not just that they work in selling the screenplay, but actually the audience really likes those also. And even when you take a really unusual screenplay like Chinatown, it often still does have those components of the formula inside of it. It just has a whole bunch of other stuff, which is really interesting. The backstory of the water wars and those characters and the knife fight, and, the dialogue is fantastic. I mean, so that's a really good point that, just because something's based on a formula doesn't mean it's bad, right? And so, yeah, if you can get ChatGPT to help you hit those points that we know make a movie move and work, then it is beneficial and it isn't sort of anti-creative or whatever. I think that's a really positive way to look at it.
Yeah, and I think, us as academics, or us as people that study film, we love being able to put great pieces of work like Chinatown, fit it within the box that we're trying to teach. Do we know if Robert Town was there with any of these formulas? Probably not, but it's easy for us to point back to it, because it gives us an opportunity to use that as a teaching model. But again, so we're retrofitting the formula to what his work was. But to your point, and I'll just drive this home for everybody, is, success looks different for everyone. And
Mm-hmm.
for some people, success may just be having written a screenplay about whatever their character or plot or whatever it is, and not necessarily, or maybe they want to, submit some ideas to a screenplay competition, or work with students locally to create a little short film. There's a lot of, success doesn't necessarily mean empire, changing the way broadcast television works, and ratings and all of that sort of stuff. While that is success or failure to certain levels of creatives, others may use it more recreationally, and still be able to feel some type of success of, boy, had this idea for years and years and years, but I'm not a screenwriter. So I think that's a really important thing, is, for anyone who's using AI creatively, is what is the destination? What is the
Hmm.
determination of success here?
Hmm.
Because otherwise, again, we're looking at frustration, we're looking at jobs lost, and people feel icky,
Hmm.
about using AI, because they think, wait, I'm doing the thing that all of the Hollywood people struck over. And
Right.
it's what they're striking for is something that is very serious. And I do not advocate the replacement of workers, but the support of creatives in furthering their own work, I think, is really important.
And teaching, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
training. Yeah. I think you make a really great case for that. It's interesting that you wrote this book about intention, because it does seem to me that that's a key thing that might be missing when we're using AI. And I was curious if you thought if AI read your book, if it would produce better screenplays?
You know what, that if at some point in time I wrote and said, using filmmaking with intention, write a screenplay, I would feel so humbled and amazed, that it would be within the database of knowledge of ChatGPT. But, mine is, my book really has, as I mentioned, more of an approach based on understanding of cinematic visceral responses. And while ChatGPT can understand certain emotions, as in write something sad or write something funny or give 3 jokes, there's a lot of setup and payoff and context that gets lost because ChatGPT, as a servant to our creativity, is trying to do something very specific. And for us as creatives, we're looking at an entire cinematic experience in that, the way that audiences connect to these narratives is not necessarily through plot, but through characters and our understanding and being able to empathize and sympathize with those characters and want to see those characters succeed. Well, how do you program ChatGPT the idea of want and empathy and sympathy? These are all such human grade core things that I'm sure is what the AI engines are trying to figure out. But I think, again, for now, there are some of those things where I can write something and I can create something that gets to such a core of humans through empathy, sympathy, and understanding human experience through all time, which, again, that's what, if my intention is to make somebody laugh at this moment, how do I construct something along the way using a character to get them to do that in a way that is real to me? And it's authentic. And I think that authenticity is something that is an interesting word when thinking about ChatGPT. Intention is an interesting word when it comes to AI. So there's some of these sort of approaches and that are very much human.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned humor because I think that's one that people sort of quickly grasp is that they ask ChatGPT to write a joke and it writes a joke and it's not funny. And, there's so much that's complex about humor and what makes something funny or not funny. What's always amazing to me is actually how often we agree on what's funny. Like humans, even across cultures and countries, that what's funny in one place is also funny in another. And yet it's something that seems to be very difficult for AI to produce is something that's funny. And I think, but that's just a very good concrete example of these other things you're talking about, what makes somebody empathetic or what makes us scared or all these other things that, it's much more complicated than what at least we've seen so far that AI is capable of.
Very true. Very true.
I was thinking about teachers using AIs, and because I've done various podcasts about teaching, I did want to just ask you a general question about using AI for teachers. Of course, we have concerns about students using AI for passing off work as though it's theirs when it in fact was created by AI. Do you have any of those concerns with teachers? Like, do you think there are bad ways that teachers can use AI?
I think it's a great question because do I believe that people can have really evil intent with the use of AI? Sure. I think a lot of the academic faculty that I have communicated with, and we go to these panels and write on it. The funny thing is that we will use ChatGPT to write PowerPoint presentations for us. Here's one example where I think it's, I am a narrative filmmaker. I am a screenwriter, a director in that realm, but I have to talk about documentary every now and then. And I am not a documentary filmmaker. It is a much different process from – coming up with the idea to, the post-production process. but I can figure it out. I've done enough that I can figure it out. But I often think of myself as a teacher as I'm just a resource, kind of a guide to point my students in directions to find more resources, almost like a librarian. Like,
Hmm.
I don't have to be a documentary filmmaker to talk about documentary, but when I sat down to say, where do I start? I have to talk about this for 1 week and 1 week alone. Do I want to go interview some documentarians or start reading some books? I just went to ChatGPT and said, what are some important considerations for students looking to, make a documentary film? And it churned out some bullet points and to what I had mentioned before. I didn't necessarily use those, but it gave me a good starting point to say, here are some things that I need to make sure that I can touch on. I'm going to organize this in the way that I want to, have my lecture go. Oh, that reminds me of, that bullet point reminds me of something that a documentary that I have seen that I want to provide a clip to talk about in class. So again, I don't think that any academic faculty at any institution is going to be able to get a job based off of ChatGPT writing their research for them or anything like that.
No, that'd be surprising at this point. Yeah.
Right. But I do think that, again, as an assistant, it helped me when I knew that, between all of my duties, I had 1 hour to put this thing together before I went and gave that lecture. And it gave me the ability to accomplish that. Whereas otherwise, as many teachers do, they just say, well, I don't know, I'm just going to walk in and wing it.
Mm.
And instead it gave my students a better experience and a more organized sort of lecture. And so, but again, I mean, ChatGPT is limited in certain ways currently. I don't know if it could really go too deep into really anything.
Hmm. Your analogy of a librarian is actually really good, because that is how we used to use librarians and maybe still do. Just sort of tell me what the standard basic information that you would receive if you made an inquiry about X, this topic. And that's exactly what a librarian would do. These are the fundamentals that show up in textbooks, or this is, general consensus about this historical event, something like that. It's not going to be very creative, and you're, not going to go around saying, oh my God, this librarian, is a creative genius. But it gives you that fundamental basic information that otherwise you'd have to go and research yourself. So this, curating for you sort of typical standard basic information that's very helpful, right? Very, very time saving.
I think so. It's just as fast as Google. There's less ads than Google. But again, they're both using your data and your input in whatever ways they wish to do it when you click, that you agree to the terms. But again, I think the memory aspect of that, if you try and dig deeper, again, just going back to, provide the 10 most common screenplay structures, Hollywood formats, and they would provide that. And then you could ask it to go deeper into any one of those. Again, it's very conversational. And so it's interesting. It provides the opportunity to do some inquiries that again, post library, sort of like, I mean, not post library, but now that a lot of people use Google instead of libraries,
right?
It provides, it provides an opportunity to have more of a conversation instead of just, what seems archaic now, which is just search terms.
Right. Yeah. I should mention we've been talking a lot about ChatGPT and I use it, but I've also been using Pi.ai. And speaking of conversational, it's been programmed, to be more chatty and friendly, and it is actually funny sometimes. It's done a better job with with humor, so sometimes it is quite funny. But yes, if the listeners would like to check out an alternative to ChatGPT, then they could try Pi.ai. Well, thank you so much. It's just been a fabulous conversation. I've really enjoyed it very much. And before I let you go, Craig, is there anything you'd like to share with the audience?
Well, I would be so honored if any of you took a look at my book, Filmmaking with Intention. It is available on Amazon, although it is at textbook prices, if you remember back to how much textbooks cost. But the other thing that I would just say is, support the industry. While we spend a lot of time on Netflix and Hulu and letting the AI algorithms show us what we should be watching while sitting on our own couch, I definitely think, support all of your theater workers, support your local independent theaters, support your local film festivals, go out and see content, be with a community of cinema enthusiasts, and support the artists that show up to those events and talk about their creative processes at things like festivals and independent cinemas. That is the best way to support the advancement of human creativity within this space, to show appreciation for all of those involved.
That's really lovely. Yeah. Thank you for mentioning that. Yeah. Support of these crazy humans and the crazy stuff that they get into. Part of the mad acts in my podcast title. So, Craig, thank you so much for taking the time today. It was really, really wonderful to meet you. And thank you for the work that you do, especially the research in helping us understand AI and how it can help us.
Yeah. Thank you so much for giving me the chance to talk.
Thank you for listening. Our goal in 2024 is to expand our audience because we get such great guests. So we'd love your help in spreading the word by sharing, subscribing, liking, thumbs upping, rating, and commenting. Got all that? Really, thanks for any support. Books, Shows, Tunes, and Mad Acts is brought to you by Discreet Guide, the training company for improving your speaking and writing skills. Also, a shout out to Podomatic, our podcast hosting platform. You podcasters out there might want to check them out. They've been good to us. And finally, thanks to Quincas Morera for the theme music.